Welcome to Essay on Community, Alchemy, the Great Work, Money, Anarcho-Capitalism, Spiritual Business, and Mystery Schools, Part 1. I began working on this video book series in the fall of 2019, and it was meant to be released in 2020. Because of the pandemic, I decided to do a 12-part series on bioterrorism first, as an ethical obligation in our information war. I'm still finishing up that series, that can be found on my website, as they are no longer uploaded on YouTube due to censorship.
Tyranny and Eugenics, through Public Health, Bioterrorism, and Vaccines, Part 9.
This video book series is targeted towards people dedicated to the evolution of consciousness, natural law teachers, Hermetic students, those crossing the chasm of initiation or already initiates, and people who want to take the great work to a deeper level. This is meat for the strong, not milk for the babes. Many may not be ready for this material, but can return to it later. I will be releasing parts of this book in relation to the video series, and because some aspects of this material are very condensed and dense, it is recommended to read along with the video and also read material on your own, slowly to better absorb the information. If you are new to this channel and the great work in general, you may go to my resources page to find various presenters of this esoteric material and related books on the matter. We must first gain spiritual knowledge before we can apply it to our lives. All my material is donation-based. Donations are greatly accepted on my website. Before we begin, a pro-life message. The topics of veganism and abortion are closely related in that they involve defending the defenseless, stopping the violent murder of the more innocent and vulnerable beings among us. To be vegan and pro-choice is a contradictory position. The abortion debate has become so confused that this person claims that having an abortion was the very foundation for her spiritual path. But how could the death of a baby, the death of life, the death of motherhood, the death of care, and the death of growth, and the death of family be anything but the opposite? Just as the evil in our world has inverted everything else that is sacred, so too has abortion been flipped on its head. I welcome you to check out my abortion series and a radical view on what it means to be pro-life. Being pro-life is about having a positive spiritual and healthy worldview, not based on self-loathing and the death of spirit. Being pro-life means being pro-human being, pro-family, pro-children, and pro-evolution on this planet, which is desperately lacking in the truth community, as some believe it is a sin to bring children into this world, eerily echoing the words of Margaret Sanger. But unlike Sanger, they see it as a sin because the world is corrupt, not that our children are corrupt. That's a better view. But seeing the world as only corrupt remains a poisoned worldview. The control system and dark occultists aren't everything in this world. Yes, they need to be exposed and we need to fight against their infringements on our rights, but there is so much more to life and experience. The things we do and the time we share with others. Each person's life has great purpose and meaning, regardless of the evil that is occurring on this planet. They cannot take away what we are here to learn, nor can they remove our capacity for love, growth, and evolution. Giving evildoers all the power of life is in fact dark sorcery. Until we stop teaching children to believe that the Satanists have won, we have become Satanists and our own eugenicists under the spell of negative metaphysics. That evil is the principle of life when it is not. To believe that giving up is our only option comes from a broken spirit. Life must go on, and through natural laws, souls are destined to be here, to evolve, to learn the lessons of strength, will, and courage, to become holistic, moral, and whole, not to stand in defeat. The grand scheme of things is so much bigger than this little world that the intelligent and evolving influences intrinsic to life can never perish, no matter how bad things get. This plane of reality would be a prison if we were bound to it for eternity, but we are not. We are meant to evolve, yet individuals still decide to bind themselves here, easily achieved through the devices and pitfalls of materialism. While this planet is overrun with evil, it cannot stay evil. Things move in cycles, and government evils ebb and flow. Evil regimes topple and are then rebuilt. The rise and fall of nations. While these regressive cycles can be ongoing depending on the consciousness and free will of its inhabitants, they aren't forever. Ultimately, the fate of everything is evolution, and in this sense, time is relative. Individual karma intersects collective karma in the lessons we share with others, yet it is not our purpose to rectify the collective state of humanity as a whole. We cannot individually save the world, as each person has free will, and many will choose to remain in lower consciousness. The savior complex is an ego trap. Our focus should be on evolving ourselves, which naturally extends the capacity to help others with moral truth, to eventually rise from this plane and its lessons. I just want to make a side note that people often conflate the New Age with occult teachings. While the New Age has borrowed from Hermeticism, it has corrupted the ideas behind ascension with egotism, ungrounded feeling, escapism, rationalization, and distraction. In fact, what the New Age teaches does not help one ascend, but keeps them bound to this plane. A true understanding of ascension is about seeing the larger spiritual context, which completely opposes the materialist paradigm that sees this world as final. Only individuals ascend, not collectives, and at a certain point in our evolution, our vibration will rise above this plane of reality. We will pass out of this plane, just as we once passed into it. Now, the idea of ascension can be an ego trap when not understood properly. But all ascension means, as well as transcendence, is evolution beyond this plane, as it can be extrapolated from natural laws. Recognizing that higher levels of existence exist should incite humility, not ego, and should open people's consciousness to continual growth that is not bound to this plane of reality. I am guessing that the majority of people reading this have probably checked out, and that's okay, for my message to act as a filter. If you cannot understand how the murder of unborn babies and animals is an act of violence, then how could you possibly seek to understand the greater nuances of natural law and initiation? I too have participated in the murder of animals and advocacy for abortion, so I am not throwing rocks from glass houses, but it's time for us all to come clean about what violence truly is. So on that note, this work is not for the masses, although available to all. Introduction to Essay. The following is an eclectic mix of analyses, with a focus on the polarity between the individual and collective within a natural law framework. It is a deconstruction of collectivism that not only finds itself in the political arena, within the destructive ideologies like nationalism and globalism, capitalism and socialism, but in business and spiritual communities, even occult communities. Collectivism is the false belief that every person makes up a whole, a collective, like cells in the body, and that this whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and therefore transcends the individual. It is based on the hive mind we see in bee colonies. But just as some animals eat other animals, the hive mind is an expression of lower base consciousness and is not something we should imitate, but something we should evolve out of. Collectivism is a logical fallacy because every person is a whole in himself, with agency, autonomy, and free will. Two individuals or more joined together do not create a larger individual, like two cells and more help to create the body. While the individual is part of the cosmos and is in correspondence with the all, this is different than being part of a collective. The individual is the indivisible unit of consciousness with identity that can evolve, and this relates to Leibniz's concept of the monad, described as a simple substance that is spiritual rather than material, without parts that cannot be created nor destroyed. Thus, the individual is the supreme unit of society. But our society is geared towards collectivism because it supports the powers that be. The more the same and uniform people become, the more controlled and manipulated they are by the men behind the curtain. Collectivism always supports monarchy, a euphemism for tyranny. Collectivism is satanic. As our society moves towards transhumanism, man merging with machine, and into a scientific dictatorship, the endgame of collectivism is the technological hive mind, called the singularity, that some more accurately call the social singularity. Collectivism opposes the principles. This analysis is based on the Hermetic principles. Mentalism. All creation is based on mental and spiritual principles. Mind and spirit are a priori to matter and are the origin and basis of all things. The all is infinite living mind and spirit. Correspondence. The similarity of levels and dimensions in our fractal holographic universe. The patterns of connection between the microcosm and macrocosm, higher and lower, internal and external, individual and aggregate, etc. As above, so below. As below, so above. As within, so without. As without, so within. The ability to understand planes beyond our knowing. Mind, spirit, and matter correspond to the individual. Polarity. All things contain dual aspects, opposites, i.e. hot, cold, substance, positive, negative, value, true, false, logic, good, evil, morality, etc. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree, the presence and absence of one thing. Extremes meet. All paradoxes may be reconciled. Mental alchemy, transmuting a negative pole into a positive one. Vibration. Matter is motion, frequency, and energy. Nothing rests. There are near infinite degrees of vibration, from the manifest to the unmanifest. Varying rates of vibration create evolutionary levels of being, from grossest matter to pure spirit. Like attracts like. Rhythm. The movement of polarity. There is a low-high arc to everything, a pendulum swing of back and forth, the ebb and flow of tide, advance and retreat. Things move in spirals and cycles, learning balance, compensation, the mental law of neutralization, transcending the wheel of time, etc. Causality. Cause and effect, action and reaction. Every effect has a cause and every cause has an effect. Everything happens according to law, as there are no coincidences or random chance. The higher dominates the lower. Mind, spirit, and actions in alignment with laws have a positive effect, while the opposite has a negative effect. Freedom, evolution, and happiness are the effects of morality for the individual and aggregate. Gender. The masculine and feminine are in all things and all levels. Sex on the physical plane, to mind and spirit on the spiritual plane. Creation, regeneration, dynamic, balanced interchange, integration, union, holistic consciousness, the alchemical wedding, etc. While I am currently writing a book on pure philosophy, this book comes from a more subjective angle. It is personal because within these pages are truths I have learned from my mistakes and experiences in community, social interaction, and the process of individuation. And the style of this book is not super organized, but a free flow of thought, more like a stream of consciousness, loosely discussing many interconnected themes. The communities and groups of focus are the natural law community, the truth community, libertarian anarcho-capitalist, and exoteric anarchist conspiracy research communities, pseudo-spiritual new age, and other communities dealing with self-help, pseudo-spiritual and entrepreneurship communities, and even just purely business communities. We will be looking at how these groups, as well as social movements, conferences, and social networks, can actually stifle individual evolution and support subverted forms of collectivism. The goals and orientations of individuation and consciousness transformation are much different than the social goals of community. Much of our social needs are actually entangled in the negative ego, a topic we will get to next time. When we outgrow certain ego needs, we shed the bonds of collectivist delusions, and our lives become more harmonious and aligned to truth. Some people may be uncomfortable discussing issues in the natural law community, under the belief that people are just doing their best, or at least attempting to do the great work, and that is sufficient. A for effort. Some may see the problems of other communities to be much worse and serious, and more deserving of our attention. While other communities do deserve attention, a natural law community that is supposed to be non-relativistic, but then starts to support relativists for utilitarian value, becomes a much worse situation. Secret societies have Hermetic roots, and it is the corruption of higher knowledge that has led to the dark occultists controlling the world. So this is no arbitrary matter. The greater the fall, the greater the corruption, and we must expose collectivist gatekeeping everywhere, even in our own backyard. Building community and supporting the alchemical process of initiation can actually work at cross purposes. Focusing on community can actually distract one from inner work. Thus, the natural law community should always be under more scrutiny than other communities, who are openly relativistic, as de-occulting corruption is an essential part of what we should be doing. I want to be honest and admit that I saw myself actually heading in the wrong direction in this community a couple of years ago, but then really deeply reflected on things for many months. And this essay is a result of that reflection. Those who get caught up in the conspiratorial aspects of evil may view co-option as externally induced, involving COINTELPRO, counterintelligence programs. This does occur. Take, for example, how the New Age movement has been co-opted by the CIA. The New Age Bible from 1976, A Course in Miracles, written by Helen Schucman, was co-authored by William Thetford. Thetford had worked as a senior psychologist for the United States government, who co-headed the CIA's mind control MK-Ultra subprojects on personality theory, while at Columbia University between 1971 and 1978. He was one of the first students of Carl Rogers, who started humanistic psychology and was also involved in CIA projects. The student of Carl Rogers is Marshall Rosenberg, who started the nonviolent communication movement, a topic discussed in a previous series. We could consider Thetford, Rogers, and Rosenberg as major influencers behind the self-help movement. It seems likely that they were unaware of the implications of what they were working on, as most professionals are, and believe they are doing good when working for the government. But mind control is especially targeted towards those with an interest in not just spirituality but psychology, as both are inextricably linked. We should not think of all CIA projects as openly diabolical and transparently evil, as mind control is a subtle art form that poisons our mind with untrue premises that placate to our desires and emotions. For example, bad psychology believes that people are inherently good. This belief is a desire and not a true statement about the world. Beliefs like this make people blind to evil in people, and evil in general. The CIA has an interest in us believing this because then people will not examine the psychopaths behind government. Their mind control is about keeping humanity in the dark in regards to their slavery by getting people to believe their desires are reality. And this is why virtual reality will be a big part of technocracy. Both humanistic psychology and the New Age are based in relativism, solipsism, I am the arbiter of truth, serving the ego, pathological acceptance, accepting things one should change about himself, denying the existence of evil and one's dark side, never confronting the shadow, and projecting positivistic delusions onto himself and others. All of these beliefs are a recipe for disaster. While it is true that hired professionals and agents of infiltration can be paid to destroy groups from the inside, it is not always necessary, as we co-opt ourselves with our own ignorance. More and more people are starting to perceive external global evils, but have not gained the depth to perceive internal individual evils and their correspondence. Evil and the dark side are not just reserved for the psychopath. We don't truly understand evil until we understand ourselves, until we understand what the polarity of good and evil means in relationship to our thoughts, feelings, and actions. We generate chaos from within to without. Those who understand how our psychology feeds the conspiratorial control system can understand how co-option, particularly in this community, can occur from the inside. When individuals simply do not understand objective truth, morality, and spiritual laws, or have not done shadow work or have gone through the paradigm shift, and yet want to act and behave as if they have for egoic and social rewards. Can we not see our fate when we lose sight of the real objective? The real objective is about alchemical initiation, the transformation of consciousness into a correct and holistic worldview. Such a worldview not only differentiates between right and wrong, but between higher and lower consciousness. Those who become initiated embody sovereignty, self-awareness, self-knowledge, and personal responsibility. They also see the social realm and its dynamics very differently than the unbegun, who are blind to these dynamics because they are blind to themselves. Most people seek groups to reinforce their own delusions instead of free them from them. But when we become aware of ourselves and the structures of our psyche, we also become aware of the social dimension and its psychical resonance that can enslave us through correspondence. Becoming sovereign means transcending the cult of personality, following a leader, seeking the glory of being a leader, and the need for resonance with other followers, as well as seeing the traps of spiritual entrepreneurship. The essence of this essay is about breaking down social structures that fit the old paradigm and need to be left behind. It is about exposing sacred cows, such as the dangers of mixing spirituality with business. The business paradigm rests on the decaying worldviews of pragmatism, collectivism, and utilitarianism, and is part of lower consciousness based on the intention of self-interest and the materialist mind. The business paradigm revolves around money, but evolving to higher consciousness is about recognizing that money is a belief system, that money has no intrinsic value. Capitalism and anarcho-capitalism are often mixed with current occult circles, and so we must go deeply into the monetary system to analyze its nature, function, and philosophy, including an analysis on cryptocurrency. If the monetary system must be transcended, then we must know exactly why. While some grasp the principles of external anarchy and can understand how government is a mental construct, they fail to see how money is also a mental construct based on collectivist ideology. This does not require us to reject money, as our belief system has become a reality and it is required to survive. This is not a glorification of poverty, but an understanding of how money is holding back the evolution of our species. The same goes for the business paradigm. Those who cannot see this should not be pretending to be doing the great work, as the great work involves evolving out of the money paradigm. Until one makes a breakthrough in this area, he cannot understand true value, and true value is as philosophically necessary to understand as objective reality and objective morality. People engaged in occult knowledge, and even just basic philosophical knowledge, find it easier to deconstruct socialism, as it is more self-evidently false and overtly entangled with authoritarian government. However, capitalism is also entangled in government through the monetary system, making it more deceptive. Socialism and communism bring the fallacies of collectivism and irrational tribalism, as well as the more collectivist versions of statism. In many ways, socialism is more evil than capitalism, but in other ways, capitalism is more evil when we compare intentions. At least some part of the socialist seeks a greater good and cares for humanity as a whole. But that greater good is misperceived as the dissolving of sovereignty and embracing the hive mind, which is evil. Putting aside the fact that the free market can never exist in its pure form in a monetary world, the capitalist spirit can be one of selfishness, opportunism, and exploitation, using people as a means to various ends. Being driven towards material gain stifles the movement towards knowledge and growth, which requires no agenda, but the pursuit of truth itself. While some will argue that the lower and higher should be married, such as uniting the materialism of money with spirituality, this synthesis of spiritual materialism is the New Age cul-de-sac, as both are inherently polarized, as we shall examine. To understand this, we first have to differentiate materialism and money from the physical world in which we live. They are not the same as we have been conditioned to believe. They are constructs to deconstruct, and the inversion of true value. The libertarian believes that he has no moral imperative or obligation when it comes to his labor or so-called property, believing that he has total free reign. But moral polarity applies to all things, including our work, and there are both selfish and righteous ways to direct it. For example, those who have important research to impart to humanity, but hold it hostage for a price, stop the flow of information that could potentially help others. Certain activities require a higher intention to be morally aligned. Putting a price on vital information like the great work, conspiracy research, and global injustices adds to the problem, as we are in an information war. What is good about profiting off of human suffering when it could be alleviated by the open spread and flow of information? People who are willing to buy products that inform them of the depressing state of humanity, which is few, or its spiritual solution, which is fewer, should not be the sole markets one is aimed at, but those who are unaware. And a person is more likely to look at free information that is contrary to his worldview than not, especially for works he does not yet understand or resonate with. How can you purchase the solution when you don't even know that the solution exists? Humanity is in a state of dire emergency. We have just entered the transhumanist dystopia, which the controllers call the Great Reset. Humanitarian work should be understood from a humanitarian paradigm, having outgrown a capitalist one. The world needs this more now than ever, and we raise our own spirit by engaging in such work. We are in the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is the sign of the humanitarian. The lack of true humanitarian spirit in the world is a root problem, as what drives us dictates the level of goodness that can be manifested. The capitalist drive behind humanitarian projects, found in pseudo-philanthropy by the elitist ruling families, has gotten us into a lot of trouble today. While their drives are more socialist, it is the crony capitalists that operate these organizations, giving meaning to the term philanthrocapitalism. But even in the microcosm, people pursue humanitarian endeavors with monetary drives, which leads to a host of problems we shall be discussing. But in the natural law community, libertarians not only adhere to capitalism, but to exoteric anarchism. Exoteric has several definitions in this essay. Exoteric anarchism is similar to exoteric religion. It is a shallow understanding of true anarchy as the absence of esoteric knowledge. There are two definitions of exoteric, negative and positive. One, the dilution and corruption of a particular topic in the negative sense, as to be digested by the masses. And two, the complementary polarity with the esoteric, as in there being an esoteric and exoteric aspect to one thing. This relates to inward and outward, public and private, and internal and external. It is a kind of correspondence. Looking at the positive meaning, we will look at the exoteric and esoteric aspects of the great work, as exoteric does have its place, specifically in spreading information to the many, or at least making it available to them, even though understanding will be of the few. About the few, we shall touch on the esoteric idea of a mystery school, differentiated from conferences, cults, cliques, and clubs, transcending the old hierarchical paradigm in which no imposed external regressive structures hinders the growth of the participants. We are also going to get into how the commercialization of a mystery school feeds into dark occultism. The main problem is that people cannot see the structure of reality or the corrupt structure of man's systems. They think that because they can create some good in a corrupt system, that this is how they turn the system good. They believe that if good people had more money than the bad people and use it for good, then the world can be a good place. But the system is intrinsically bad, and bad people will always have more money than good people, as the monetary system is itself dark sorcery. The evil is within the structure itself. Money does not exist in worlds of evolved species. The system can only get worse, regardless of what pragmatic good is created within it. We have to seek to understand things at the fundamental level, at the metaphysical level, to see how the structure of things determines their ends, despite the fact that no evil system creates only evil. But the good an evil system creates is the false good, or an unsustained good, or a temporary good that is ultimately destructive. The structure of the matrix is bad, but each of us still has to contend with it. We must attempt to be ethical within an unethical system. This can only happen to some extent, never fully, as pure ethical behavior within the matrix cannot exist. But this does not mean that we give up trying, or that we believe in and promote the unethical system, simply because it has a lot of power. Evolution of consciousness first requires that our mind and emotions transcend the matrix, even though our actions and bodies are bound. While our interaction with the matrix cannot be pure, we can find the purity of goodness in our minds and hearts and personal life that is apart from the matrix. There's a difference between community that seeks to be aligned with objective truth and a community that does not. The differences between these shall be explored through the method of apophysis, via negativa, which is our underlying method of understanding. Learning through the negative. We make room for truth in our hearts and minds when shedding falsity. Apophysis is the least understood concept in the natural law community. The desire to construct or create within ourselves the good is actually an ego trap in terms of evolving consciousness. How can you know what growth is when it is beyond your current understanding? Growth comes from the infinite and the intelligence of life that is greater than our own. Apophysis is about making room for growth rather than projecting what it is by resolving what is holding us back, whether that be letting go of false beliefs, healing trauma, and facing our shadow and hypocrisy. This goes completely against New Age teachings and even humanistic psychology, which are about ignoring and denying the negative by creating the false positive, projecting the positive, and behaving as if the desire for the positive is enough to make it real. In the New Age space, criticism is not allowed, judgment is considered evil, bringing up the negative is blasphemy, and the mere feeling of goodness is the ultimate. But how do you feel what is truly good if you do not know what is truly good? This is actually what destroys the emergence of the real positive. In the context of community, we understand true community by understanding false community. Apophysis itself is kryptonite to an uninitiated community. Most spiritual communities avoid critique as being negative, afraid to expose any conflicts that might tear at social cohesion. Yet, an initiated community, when about truth and knowledge, cannot avoid such conflicts, as without critique, there cannot be resolution or evolution. The initiate knows different levels of understanding do exist. Thus, there will be contradictions in perspectives. In short, group cohesion can never be the goal on the path to truth. If truth divides people, then so be it. You cannot be sovereign without the truth. When critique becomes taboo, communities become cults. When an individual does not see value in critique, in both self and others, he fails to see how critical thinking skills are an integral part of the evolutionary path. Life is not just about passive acceptance, but active correction. Without the awareness of our shadow and dark side, the wrong direction, the wrong path, the wrong motives, and without moral caution and restraint, we are lost, living without a compass. Group dynamics can become like the word salad of New Age rhetoric, being a clusterfuck of agendas and perspectives. To the group, evolution can simply look like the addition of new perspectives and new ways of seeing things, and agreement becomes a type of social currency. But the occult path is being able to discern between each and object when necessary, which requires freedom from social agendas. This is about separating the wheat from the chaff. A big trap for spiritual growth is, of course, the lack of ego awareness and alchemical refinement. But what is less talked about is the social dimension of ego and social resonance that present a greater challenge. Falsity binds us from the truths of not only self, but of others. The false part of ourselves shall then find mutual resonance with the false parts of another. Becoming objective of ourselves is also becoming objective of our social dynamics. When social structures start to be organized, they create collectivist traps, as people start to prioritize group solidarity over truth, and people prioritize group projects over work and consciousness. From the old paradigm, things necessarily become political and about social power, clout, affiliation, cross-promotion, which become not only distractions for growth, but prohibitors of it. The philosophical path is about individuation, and certain group dynamics can hold us back when we don't understand how our unexamined needs and unconscious archetypes are projected onto collectives and how they control us. Internal work is discovering mentalism and archetypes that are intrinsic to the cosmos and their polarity of manifestation within ourselves and others. We must understand their true good and false evil forms, as most of us have been imprinted with a negative version since birth by our parents and the control system. You may be able to tell that I'm writing from my past experience in a New Age type cult, but let me clarify that the cult I took part in many years ago was not based on the New Age, but a shared interest in consciousness and philosophy, with mutual criticism towards the New Age. I've been a critic of the New Age since my early 20s, which is for 20 years. I say this because what groups openly claim they represent is not always the case. Many cults, in fact, claim they are not cults. The label is not the thing. Moreover, and along with this, I ran a philosophy group for 8.5 years in Los Angeles when I was aged 23 to 31. And I used to be part of the integral community. So again, these are personal lessons I am imparting, and it may be helpful for some. Yet even if you have never been a person to seek groups or collectives to become part of, the dynamics I will be discussing still affect you, as they are found online, in the business world, in cities, and most organizations. The patterns we are discussing are as old as history itself, and relate to the macrocosmic control system. We use the pyramid to describe the control system, but it is important to keep in mind that the pyramid has both a positive and negative expression. The negative pyramid is a social hierarchy and pyramid scheme, with power and control in the hands of the few. It is also a false synthesis of a false dialectic, but its positive expression is the trinity of self and the principle of balancing gender opposites. Most so-called spiritual communities center around a leader, yet true sovereignty moves in the opposite direction, towards decentralization. The individual as leader. Individuals need freedom to stand in truth, whether the group does or not, and to be free to break from the group, especially when we live in a world where 99.9% of the population are moral relativists. Sovereignty requires that one be radical, but not reckless. Any group based on a leader restricts the group's potential to the level of that leader. It is often true that others cannot surpass that level without leaving the group or destroying it in the process. Yet without leadership, there is no cohesion to a community, and likewise, by promoting sovereignty, there is also no cohesion in community. This is why a true democracy cannot occur within the structure of government, or any collectivist structure for that matter. Sovereign beings do not occupy political or religious organizations, otherwise they limit their evolution. The system requires political leaders and priests, necessarily cultivating followers. But to be sovereign is to not be a follower. The pragmatists will say, well, we live in a world of followers. It's just human nature, so we should attempt to lead them well. But the metaphysician is not interested in supporting the old paradigm that binds human nature to lower consciousness, nor does he accept the status quo just because of how powerful and real it is. With absolute sovereignty, there is only cohesion within oneself, and ultimately self-mastery is required prior to obtaining proper group interactions. Yet most people think of this in the opposite fashion, that one gains himself through his relationships with others, when he can only lose himself in others in the absence of self-knowledge. Being chameleon-like promotes superficial harmony, but this is karmically dangerous because one starts to align his thoughts and feelings to another, rather than the objective truth itself. Group resonance feels good, and confrontations feel bad, until the individual rises above this to feel good about the truth. Social anxiety and fear in social situations are a sign that inner work needs to be done. But most people ignore this sign, and some even push themselves to be more social, to counteract what they are really feeling internally. I've done this most of my life, thinking that being more social was the key, when being less social was actually the key. For what we are truly looking for lies within ourselves, and growth takes time. The undeveloped heart and mind are easily manipulated socially, in which a person may experience some degree of self-deception and self-victimization. Social influences can be very strong. They can compromise a person's authenticity. They are particularly strong upon women, and can steer a person in many directions he might not have otherwise considered. The larger his social circle is, the more in contradiction he can find himself. Social forces and unexamined social motives can be so powerful that we often find very discerning people alone lose their discernment in social situations. We should see such situations as a test to our sovereignty and our courage to align to truth when it is socially uncomfortable. Sovereignty requires a great deal of strength and stability to not get thrown off balance by group influences. If you do get thrown off balance, that is a sign of your own lack of development, and I'm definitely still developing in this way. Mark Passio has done a brilliant job ushering in a cultural zeitgeist, deocculting natural law. Those who have benefited from his material, such as myself, feel infinite gratitude in our hearts towards his labor. This recommended article on Hermetic principles states, "What we can be certain of is that these principles of Hermeticism held immense value for these ancient cultures, whoever their author may be. And whenever they resurface in culture, they act as a catalyst to creative renaissance, revolutions, and cultural regeneration." Indeed, these principles have resurfaced in our culture, but is that enough to transform it? Where are things headed today, and what are the obstacles in spreading this material to others, trying to create community and even a teacher's circle? Can a group even assemble up to the Hermetic standard? All potentials exist, but we must understand through via negativa the difficulties for such an occurrence, and how the need and compulsivity towards communal manifestation can sabotage it, when this must be a natural emergence, devoid of ulterior agendas. Any compromises of integrity in the interaction with others for the sake of group agendas, which inevitably occurs with an expansion of a group, becomes the cracks of the foundation. Is putting out natural law material and content creation the ultimate objective of the great work? Can content creation actually become a deterrent from spiritual growth and a form of spiritual materialism? Just as spiritual businesses confuse growing a market or network with evolution, could content creation also be confused with the evolution of consciousness? Can the drive to spread information compromise the integrity of such information? What are the problems of seeking out those with social power and influence, i.e. mavens, to spread natural law information? Is this a numbers game in which we should take a utilitarian approach to the great work and make it as mainstream as possible? Is that not the objective for every other social movement and business enterprise? To recruit people? Should we spread the information at all costs, even if it means giving the unbegun the impression they have understanding when they do not? Who wants to be told he does not have understanding in the comfort of a social group? When does this become a form of gatekeeping? This essay is a multidimensional analysis of the great work, going beyond public pursuits and social agendas. Our Hermetic predecessors knew that only very few individuals of every age have the capacity to understand natural laws, as the esoteric is known by the few, and exoteric by the many. This is the pyramid of understanding, with the few at the top and the many at the bottom, but is not a dominator hierarchy, nor is it a positive or ideal expression. It is how consciousness and free will has manifested on this planet to an aggregate ruled by lower consciousness for millennia. As much as we want to blame it on the dark occultists, it is humanity as a whole who has rejected the pursuit of higher knowledge as to live in the darkness of materialism. To suddenly believe that we have the power to flip this pyramid and that humanity can suddenly become enlightened by natural law information is foolish, especially when we understand the long journey of evolution through many reincarnations involved in transcending this plane. Even giving every person on the planet this information would not change the world, because unless they change their intention and worldview, such information cannot even be understood. In fact, because their worldview would reject this information outright, giving it to them prematurely could cause them to attack and criticize the material, poisoning the body of natural law information. Such information would no longer stand out in its true form. Besides that, are misinterpretations, which we have already seen the New Age do to this information already. For example, they have added the law of relativity to the Hermetic principles, making the false claim that relativism exists in all things, and in the end, meaning comes down to our perspective and perception. This is absolutely false. Meaning is in fact objective. Another example is the Kybalion and Hermetic principles discussed in this wealth creation mastermind, where you can sign up and be part of a growing network of entrepreneurs. That's right, the Kybalion can make you wealthy in our artificial monetary system that creates global poverty. Do we want to feed into the New Age and business model by sharing this information indiscriminately? Everything gets co-opted into the matrix and contracts back to the control system, the old paradigm and lower consciousness. So how we share this information is of vital importance to keeping its purity. To the pure, all things are pure. To the base, all things are base. The Kybalion. The concept of the Hermetic seal has multiple meanings. For one, Hermetic knowledge is naturally sealed and occulted from individuals who are not ready for it. The lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. And secondly, the ancient Hermeticists kept their teachings secretive and for a select few who could receive the information. In discussing their principle of secrecy, the Kybalion claims they did not believe in casting pearls before swine, but giving milk for the babes, meat for the strong men. They had a policy of careful dissemination of the truth, as they did not want the secret doctrine to become crystallized into a creed or a system. Natural law is sacred knowledge, but we live in the world of the profane. The ancient Hermeticists saw that occult knowledge becomes diluted and distorted when our goal is to reach the masses, ultimately feeding into the dark occult. Were they extreme about this? And did they end up occulting knowledge in the process to prevent this from happening? Yes. But can we be extreme the other way? Absolutely. We are going to be looking into what the middle path looks like, where we don't occult knowledge, but where we don't become careless about how it is disseminated either. The warnings of the Hermeticists should be taken seriously, and we shall investigate in more depth why making the esoteric mainstream is undesirable. Quality should be prioritized over quantity. It is better to have one great teacher than many lesser teachers confusing the message. It is better to have one great student than many students with mixed intentions. A single initiate has a much greater capacity for goodness than a team of fools. A single voice can make more waves in the world than a collective with millions of members. When we truly understand the occult, we recognize the responsibility required for being a proper steward of this information. The qualifications for being a teacher are incredibly important, as the highest Hermetic knowledge can easily regress into New Age half-truths for egoic purposes and social agendas, especially when relativists take the reins. Another issue is that the pursuit to become a spiritual teacher can be an ego trap, mixed with the circus of social media, the cult of personality, and entrepreneurship culture. It is the mixing of spiritual knowledge with lower consciousness that becomes more dangerous than simply the expressions of lower consciousness itself. The dark occultists have lower consciousness, combined with higher understanding, which is what makes them so toxic to this world. Again, as above, so below. While some encourage others to become public teachers, I caution them against it, and will elucidate the traps, as this isn't something to all get on the bandwagon for. Wisdom is not only action, but the balance between restraint and action, and to continually become aware of what is unwise to do, as much as, or even more than what is wise to do. Apophysis. Wisdom is also about connection to timing. When a person has a true calling towards something, it emerges organically, without the compulsions of ego or being pressured into it by another. Often when people try to force a role on themselves or others for particular payoffs, it becomes contrived and inauthentic, as intentions are not pure. By making becoming a public spiritual teacher the ideal, we encourage premature decisions, rushing through material, and wrong intentions and misaligned agendas. And there is also the trap in identifying with particular roles, which removes the space for growth. The instant people have to maintain a certain image is the instant they become enslaved. I'm going to repeat that. The instant people have to maintain a certain image is the instant they become enslaved. No matter how well-intentioned one believes this to be, the outcome is false knowledge. Now, as a side note, my life is a cautionary tale, so I tend to emphasize caution while others emphasize encouragement. What adds to this is that astrologically I have Saturn on my ascendant. But I don't want to be imbalanced towards caution, because at the same time I understand the value of going all the way in particular lessons and hitting that accelerator full speed towards self-destruction. I often wonder how much I would have learned if I hadn't been so extreme, which allowed me to crash into the walls of my own ignorance, to be forced to pick up the pieces and attempt to reassemble them, more according to objective truth. But now that I understand certain lessons, I do not wish to relearn them, and I enjoy the peace and serenity of self-knowledge over the extremes of self-ignorance. What are the standards for teaching? We will get into that later, but the first criteria is understanding what objective morality is, something of which even the most prominent Western thinkers throughout time cannot do. I like to use this quote from Plato's Republic. Unless the person is able to abstract and define the idea of the good, and unless he can run the gauntlet of all objections and is ready to disprove them, not with appeals to opinion, but to absolute truth, never faltering at any step of the argument, unless he can do all this, you would say that he knows neither the idea of the good, nor any other good. He apprehends only shadows, if anything at all, which is given by opinion, not science. It is one thing to lead yourself astray, but the karma of leading others astray should be a thought that weighs upon our souls. Those with social power and influence have a greater responsibility, and their karma is magnified. False teachers create cul-de-sacs for people, and no one evolves in a cul-de-sac. And even good teachers can lose their way. Moreover, each individual has their own unique purpose, and not everyone is meant or needs to be a public teacher. My Dharma is writing, and it landed in my lap without my pursuit. I don't even consider myself a teacher per se, although it is possible that through my writing or written dialogue with another, others could learn, but that would be tangential. One can put out the truth, but cannot expect things from others. I pursued writing in my 20s, when I did not have wisdom, and I recognized this, as most of my 20s was recognizing how full of shit I was, and I stopped, which was ironically the wise thing to do. I pursued art instead, and I went to 3 psychics for validation of my art career, and all 3 told me I was meant to be a writer. I was actually sad to hear this, as I was attached to being an artist. I didn't think I would return to writing until my later years, realizing the growth and responsibility required in such an endeavor. But my life conditions steered me to writing much sooner and swept me away from my art career. So what I've been doing mostly for the last 5 years is a surprise to me. But I know it's true because I wasn't looking for it. I love writing because it allows me to go into explanatory depth and to a level of abstraction that I couldn't do in my mind alone. Perhaps this is due to weaknesses in my mind, but regardless, it has become methodological, a dialectic process that allows me to challenge my ideas and refine them. And making videos like these, reading my writing, allows me to incorporate the amazing art from others. But I do see the traps even involved in writing and role identification as a writer. I've been working hard on that and foresee that motherhood will be the next step in my evolution. In addition to false teachers or premature teaching is the problem of good teachers who do not practice these teachings in their personal lives or know how to. Their knowledge only goes so far as the basics of the intellect. I am not proclaiming self-mastery in this, but pointing out the teacher trap. It is one thing to understand Hermetic principles and natural law in theory, but quite another to apply it in one's life. While one does not need to know how to apply it in his life in order to properly teach the body of natural law information, becoming a teacher of this material can be a trap to his evolution by preventing the next step in alchemical growth. A person can identify to his role as a teacher and build his life around a public persona and no longer see himself as a student or in the process of learning. By focusing his time and attention on websites, presentations, and content creation, he can become distracted from the inner work he should be doing. The work that is performed in consciousness and not outward action. In our Western culture, we emphasize outward action and reward, and measure a man by his accomplishments. But this is different from the evolution of consciousness, and usually becomes a distraction from coming to know ourselves and from contemplating the lessons we are supposed to learn, both of which do not grant an egoic or social reward. What is less discussed is the esoteric aspect of action, using action to inwardly change the self through higher knowledge, perpetually. The map is not the territory, and another famous saying is that, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, and in practice there is. The conflation of knowledge with wisdom is a big problem in the natural law community. For the ability to relay the information correctly and share it with others is part of the great work, but not the meat of the great work, which is implementation. And no, application is not about starting a business, a project, or a network, but about holistic living. In a sense, you could say that the paradigm shift required to understand the body of natural law information doesn't even come close to the paradigm shift required to apply and integrate this information into oneself and his daily existence. That requires immense psychological development and shadow work. As a body of knowledge, natural law is just theory, and when not applied, it is dissociated knowledge. But by sharing this information the endgame, we can unintentionally encourage skipping this important step, which is the foundation for the great work. One may find himself in the cul-de-sac that he has arrived at enlightenment when he has merely passed step 1 and has barely begun the journey. Not only is there absolute cosmic truth, but there is relative manifest truth, which is different for every person as it involves his specific life conditions, unique psychology, and evolutionary path. Only individuals evolve back to the source, and so the individual should be given greater weight than a collective, as the goal of collective enlightenment is a collectivist trap. The great work is not just a universal body of knowledge for everyone to unite with as their flagship, but about the specific knowledge of the individual in which it is integrated with. Furthermore, the work of internalizing spiritual knowledge in the process of initiation is a very different process from simply collecting new terms, concepts, and phrases to add to your linguistic toolbox or to elevate your spiritual business. In our postmodern culture, we revel in the novelty of words and phrases that can dress the ego and gain one popularity in a crowd to play out narcissistic desires. But it is only in meaning and understanding that we actually gain value from ideas, and that requires nothing short of immense inner work. In the co-option of the natural law community, we should expect to see more individuals fitting natural law content into their business models, simply for its novelty, and to expand one's market. Natural law material may fall upon your lap, but it cannot find you. You must find it. You may have waited for it, but even still, there is much work for you to do to make yourself worthy of it. You must seek its understanding and application in your life as if it were as important as the air you breathe. It must be your discovery. It must be known by you, spoken by you in your words, part of your living awareness, and perceived in your moment-to-moment reality. Sovereignty is not about uniting with a person's teachings, but about uniting with the truth itself, unhinged from any messenger. This is about the perception of truth and personal knowledge of truth, not just eternal truths, but relative truths. This is not about the regurgitation or repackaging of an external message. Again, I write from personal experience, as my judgments are the judgments of myself. Natural law found me before I found it, and I was waiting for it. In 2014, I began studying philosophy full-time while car camping, making a big shift from being a freelance artist to an independent writer. I wanted to actually discover and test natural law for my own independent studies. After digesting over 150 What on Earth is Happening podcasts, I began to experience the peace and happiness that results from attempting to apply morality as an evolutionary practice. And I felt love and bliss on a daily basis, living on the edge of poverty. But only a year later, I had made some bad decisions, and my life became a train wreck as my shadow came to kick my ass in an extremely big way. This involved public humiliation, a destructive relationship, getting wrapped up in an imbalanced ideology of hatred, abuse of psychedelics, and landing in jail. It was more than the complete opposite of everything I experienced the year prior. Amidst this self-created crisis, I had to confront my biggest demon, a literal demon, by the way, driving me towards suicide. While we will touch on the subject of the demonic realms, it is an incredibly important subject to go deeper with because it is directly related to sovereignty. Entities can only feed off of your lack of sovereignty, as this is a two-way street. This is the secret the New Age doesn't want you to know because it will put some of them out of business, and I've directly confronted an entity clearer about this. At a later point, I will go into why the supernatural is part of our metaphysical reality. Returning back to my story, this experience ended up being necessary because it exposed all that I was suppressing in my consciousness, such as the root of my self-loathing and insecurity, and my lack of sovereignty over the dark forces feeding off of me. It exposed so much that I had been hiding from by focusing exclusively on my intellectual development and the study of natural law. And I had become terribly left-brain imbalanced. This is why I critique the dark side of what I do. I research, study, and content create. But all of these actions can be a trap from doing adequate shadow work and from becoming holistic in life. When profound information pours in from the heavens above, it stirs up the darkest rejected parts of ourselves and the soul's cry for integration. The rhythmic swing of the shadow can take years to manifest after great life-changing spiritual revelations. The more you confront truth, the more shadow you must also confront. For those of us truly committed to the path, we may face some incredibly dark times, and that is part of the process. For without inner confrontation, the negative ego, shadow, and dark side create uncomfortable dissonance, and the tension between the conscious and subconscious brings a painful backdrop to the experience of life, even if not exteriorized in dramatic events. Most people are not honest about this pain, and others believe it to be part of life. While suffering may help us grow by learning what is wrong, false, and evil the hard way, we should not become married to our suffering, as that is part of the negative ego and dark side as well. With more self-knowledge, there will be less suffering. Rhythm and polarity exist the higher you go, as all laws manifest until return to source, the ultimate paradox. But the negative at higher vibratory levels is not about the deep pain of suffering from self and cosmic ignorance, and is felt more like the positive upward spiral movement of growth. Most people don't commit to anything and remain safe in their nihilistic worldview, without a lot of psychological drama. But they live in a state where they are somewhat content with their discontentment and boredom. Yet those who commit even to the wrong path and consequently go through a lot of psychological drama actually open the potential for radical change. A potential which does not exist in the nihilist. During my dark times, I recognized how I was a dark occultist to my own soul, my fear enslaving myself from the truth of self-hatred and insecurity. These self-deceptions were buried so deep for so many years, I had no clue of their existence. I believed I was living a life of love when I should have been looking for my shadow. I didn't go deep within myself. I merely lost myself in my work. While we commonly think the greatest deception is that which the dark occultists are pulling on humanity, the truth is that the greatest deception is self-deception, and one can be engaged in self-deception even after discovering natural law. Until you confront the worst part of yourself, until you confront how you fed your own demons, which is actually more terrifying than confronting the terror going on in the world, you can only be a hypocrite. What helped me was meeting a teacher and confronting myself in a deeper way. And so I want to bring up the topic of non-public teachers, their importance, and how they contrast with public teachers. While public teachers can disseminate information, private teachers can focus more on self-knowledge and the territory where the principles manifest, and can help the student through personal dialogue and one-on-one exchange. While both types of teaching is valuable, our current celebrity cult of personality culture tends to exclusively focus on public teachers, which is usually tied into career goals, when non-public teachers can have an even greater capacity to help one change. I would absolutely not be to the level of understanding I am if I were without the private teachers who have helped me in the realm of self-knowledge. Certain individuals can pop up into our life by the stroke of luck and fate, having a radical impact when they can see us clearly and give us certain keys that are uniquely tailored to our specific consciousness. When one starts to engage in the real spiritual path, they become open to the wisdom in others who have done more inner work than they have. The path is no longer about the ego and having to maintain a facade, and the fact that others exist with more spiritual knowledge is no longer threatening to the ego. These teachers do not seek an ego payoff from what they do. They do not seek public glory, nor do they have websites or followings, as they see how our social values are inverted, and their intentions are to truly help others with what they have learned when the opportunity arises, rather than feed the vanity found in the image of helping others. In my early 20s, when I was so confused, I met one of these types of teachers who started to help me understand objective morality. He shared with me what he had learned from his Wing Chun martial arts teacher, Hawkins Cheng, who trained under Ip Man and who he considered an evil genius, and said, "You need the eye to see and the standard to check." This directly confronted my relativism. It is a statement about perception and discernment. On the subject of evil, he shared with me what he learned from his meditation teacher, who said that evil doesn't get less strong, just more subtle the higher you go. I became aware of the existence of evil in the situations that appear to be the most good. These two very simple phrases revolutionized the way I saw things, and their contemplation deepened my consciousness. Spiritual insight is always about looking behind the surface, and there can be a fine line between the light and dark occult. Having one's internal reality misaligned to one's philosophy can lead to crisis and breakthrough, depending on the degree the individual can surrender to truth and admit error. Are we honest about our psychological pain, inner dissonance, and contradictions, and are we brave enough to seek them out? Can we be the de-occultists of our own minds and hearts to see what we don't want to see? Can we look in the mirror and see our dark side staring back without flinching? The aspect of natural law that no one can teach you is self-knowledge. If you do not know your mind, emotions, or actions, then your understanding of principles necessarily falls short. And there is no greater dark occultist than yourself when it comes to that kind of knowledge. Layers upon layers of self-obfuscation remain in our subconscious and shadow, all to be revealed in time. And that is the path to inner freedom. Self-awareness is being able to identify the patterns occurring within and without oneself. The ability to properly identify aspects of the psyche cannot be memorized from a book, nor stolen from another's words and understanding. To identify what something is, especially identifying aspects of the psyche, like the negative ego, the shadow, the dark side, takes direct powers of observation, honesty, and authenticity that cannot be taught. While one can point out aspects in another and give him keys to unlock his own psyche, he cannot open it for him or teach him how to see it for himself. While the body of natural law information can help us understand the absolute standard from which to discern, having accurate perception of our internal realms must be sought as well. For without self-knowledge, the natural law standard has no correspondence to the individual. True understanding cannot be a tool in your linguistic toolbox, for it is not a means to an ends, but an ends in itself. Transformation is about throwing out the toolbox and the pragmatist worldview that accompanies it, as we are not looking for tools that serve us or what works to our advantage, even towards goals that appear good. It is about the true nature of ourselves and the objective good. This difference in intention is critical to ken. On that note, let's wrap up this introduction with the topic of intention. While in the truth community, some may work to sharpen the mind and deconstruct beliefs, most fail to work upon their intentions as to purify them. In most spiritual communities, the biggest assumption is that everyone has good intentions. For example, look at this statement on a meme made by a so-called holistic psychologist, saying, "People don't have bad intentions, they have unhealed emotional wounds." Another incorrect statement on this meme is every word you speak is an affirmation, which condemns stating objective truths that are negative. Again, there is no apophysis in the New Age. Besides those two statements, everything else on this meme is at least partially true. This statement about intention is a regressive belief that excuses ill intention and makes it okay because of one's victimhood. Sure, wounds are involved in our psychological complexes, but ego identification to our wounds is very destructive and bypasses true healing. Our dark side and shadow can integrate with our trauma and victimhood, preventing evolution. As we shall examine, the negative ego receives a payoff for aborting growth and is fed by our emotional wounds, which leads to blind, immoral action, imbalanced thinking, projection, and misperception. The New Age is generally about spiritual bypass. Part of the alchemical process is seeing how our wounds are wrapped up in our dark side and shadow. And only until this realization can we begin the true healing process, because we are no longer excusing our behaviors and using our wounds as a shield from growth. Lower intention is not just about the intention to do ill towards another, but is about being motivated and driven by the elements of lower consciousness, such as fear, insecurity, anxiety, apathy, anger, suffering and despair, lust, greed, ego, vanity, pride, arrogance, shadow, selfishness, and materialism. Any of our egoic or psychological complexes can become the fuel in which we do things. No matter how good things appear that we are doing, when it is coming from misaligned intent, it is not good, as the ends do not justify the means, intent. The belief that everyone has good intentions is the height of psychological ignorance, and is a lie so satanic that it has been propagated by the dark occultists themselves through the Tavistock Institute and CIA's humanistic psychology, again deeply related to the New Age. Look at the world today and how during our bioweaponized pandemic, we are literally being raped, murdered, and plundered by the WHO, CDC, NIH, the Defense Department, and pharmaceutical companies. And no matter how bad things get, people refuse to project anything other than good intentions onto these institutions despite the mess. The belief in authority is strengthened by the belief in good intentions, and together, this is the belief that those in positions of authority only have good intentions. But even putting the diabolical psychopathic intentions of the elites aside, the average person's intentions are not aligned to the good as well, and so he plays his part in creating the control system through delusion. People work for corrupt institutions, and even when corruption comes to light, they excuse it with a comforting belief that, well, we all just have good intentions at the end of the day. No, we don't! It is the symbiosis between conscious evil and unconscious evil that perpetuates human slavery, as above, so below. Until one starts the alchemical work, he knows nothing of his true intentions and motivations. That in a world of lower consciousness comes from lower consciousness. People are even so warped to believe that it makes you a good person to assume that everyone has good intentions. This glorification of naivety and exaltation of humanity is again peddled by our overlords at Tavistock, who have perfected emotional mind control. They wage the psychological warfare of the false positive, false goodness, and the false light that feeds directly into that which is overtly evil. The yin and yang of evil is evil and the false good. While the falsehood that everyone has good intentions is a catastrophic belief, a more subtle falsehood that is still as insidious is the belief that everyone pursuing spiritual matters has good intentions, or that everyone in particular communities and movements have good intentions. This couldn't be further from the truth. Collectivist beliefs about a group make one blind to the individual. I only started to deconstruct this destructive belief in my mid-20s when I went through my first spiritual crisis. At the time, I thought I was spiritual. I thought everyone I was hanging out with were spiritual. As like most people, I thought reality was whatever I believed. And everything went to shit and up in flames. In heartbreak over certain events that unraveled deep psychological issues, I was on my knees debating whether I should turn myself in to a mental asylum. The teacher I had synchronistically met during this time that I earlier talked about was quite blunt when, after hearing my story, eventually told me that a piece of shit existed where my character should be. As harsh as this seems, I knew he was telling me this from a loving place, and it was the most enlightening statement anyone could have told me. Hitting rock bottom opened me to hearing ego-crushing truths that came to be my salvation. Discovering that it was the lack of character development that led me to crisis was exactly what I needed to hear. Seeing how fucked my intentions were was my first step to doing real inner work for the first time in my life. How were they fucked? My intentions were geared towards feeding my ego, pride, and persona, and constructing relationships that made me feel good in being part of a group who got off on themselves in a narcissistic echo chamber while calling it love. Intentions are not our conscious desires of what we want them to be, but contain our unconscious motivations. And this is why the subject of the subconscious, shadow, and dark side really needs to be understood. Much of our intentions are submerged in the subconscious and are not seen in the shadow, and can be hijacked by the negative ego and our dark side. Most people think of our dark side as simply the intent to murder, steal, and violate. But our dark side is not just about violence, but the negative expressions of consciousness as well. Also, the intent to harm another can manifest to lesser degrees in many other ways. It can be deceiving a person, using them, taking out your anger on them, treating another unfairly, etc. The act of purifying our intention and aligning it with morality and truth requires incredible time and attention and a great deal of moral effort. It is not something automatic, as we have been conditioned to believe. We don't by default have good and pure intentions, as we are not by default aware of ourselves. Being engaged in shadow work as a daily practice is the key and is different from giving lip service to it. People can act like experts on the shadow and have not even had a glimpse of their own shadow their entire life. The word is not the thing. There is an extreme emphasis on action in the natural law community, while there is little emphasis on intention. Much of this is a reaction to the New Age that emphasizes intention over behaviors. But we can swing from one imbalance to the other in the false belief that intentions don't matter, but only actions do. While the neglect of observing moral polarity in actions and behaviors is indeed a shortcoming of the New Age, the New Age does not even focus on intention in the right way, so we cannot even say that it is legitimately about intention. The New Age is not about right intention, but the belief in good intention, and such a belief is the same as ignorance. It does not understand moral polarity in intention, just like it does not understand polarity in action. To the New Age, anything that appears good or is projected as good is good. Thus, it is really not about good intentions at all. As we saw from that meme, the New Age is even about rationalizing ill intention. The problem in the world is not that people are committing bad actions with good intentions, but that people have mixed intentions under the facade that they only have good intentions. That is why in discussing intention, we are discussing purity of intention. Good intention is more accurately called right intention, as it also involves the intention for truth, to be true and perceive what is true, and to know reality as it is, piercing the veil of appearances. You cannot have good intentions if you do not care for truth over your egoic desires. That's right. Right intention is the intention to be right, but not self-righteous, which comes from egotism, pride, vanity, and arrogance. But in our relativistic culture, even seeking to be right is conflated with righteousness, where the intention to create social harmony is prioritized. If people truly had good intentions, their bad actions would ultimately be corrected. It is more accurate to say that the road to hell is paved with mixed intentions, or that the road to hell is paved with the belief that we have good intentions, rather than to say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Right intention will ultimately lead one in the right direction. even if one is facing turmoil from his ignorance, dark side, and shadow. Right intention can be what eventually pulls us out of all that, as even a logical mind is trapped without it. It is essential for growth because it sets our spiritual direction. Spirit is also linked to intention as our spiritual aim, and this sets out our destination and our ultimate objective and end. Our spiritual aim or intention should be pointed upwards towards the higher and beyond this plane, as to be transcendent rather than materialistic and bound to the material plane. As above, so below, rather than as below, so above. The prioritization of action over intention, spirit, and mind is actually an error that we will later discuss, and it directly relates to the law of mentalism and metaphysics, which places the invisible in higher priority than the visible. Some philosophers have called this a priori. This should not be taken in a dissociative sense, or as devaluing the events of the visible, or lowering significance of the physical plane, but as an understanding of reality creation and the necessary order of things. Cause in consciousness is prior to effect and has more significance in that way, but this doesn't mean effect is meaningless, as effect, both positive and negative, drives evolution. How does this relate to us at the practical level? Most people make decisions based on the conditions of the physical realm, while the initiate makes decisions based on transcendent principles, regardless of the conditions of the physical realm. In short, he does not compromise principles for the conditions of the physical realm. At the same time, we live in the matrix under duress, where we cannot survive apart from it, and so we must discuss where compromise within the matrix is appropriate and where it is not. Looking at this through the macrocosmic lens, the tripart trivium process is from beginning, logos, middle, nous, and end, telos. We must begin with a good foundation in spirit, right intention, and mind, right worldview, to consistently and consciously evolve as to manifest the good in action and expression. We're wrapping up here, but I want to remind you that this is just an introduction to the topics we are going to discuss.